The semi-autonomous Iraqi Kurdish regional government's referendum on independence has met strong opposition not only from the international community, such as the United Nations, the US and the European countries, but also by neighbors like Iran, Turkey and Syria. Meanwhile, Israel's support for the referendum has triggered concerns on the vote's potential for causing great geopolitical change in the Middle East. What does this referendum mean to the Kurdish people and the Middle East region at large? What are the countermeasures to the rising separatism trend? To discuss the many issues related to this historic independence referendum, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Anna Tangen, author and columnist. We shall also talk to Kirkuk and Mosul, political analyst, writer in Turkey, and Mir Jivdanfar, Middle East analyst in Israel through satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's take a look at this background story.
For hundreds of years, the ethnic Kurds have fought for independence. And for those living in Iraq, they are a step away from making this dream come true. The leader of the referendum, Massoud Barzani, comes from the influential Barzani clan, which rose to power in the early 19th century and led the Kurds. The Kurds are an ethnic group who live in a territory overlapping northern Iraq, southeastern Turkey, northwestern Iran, and northern Syria. Some researchers regard them as the largest ethnic group without a state. They have a global population of about 30 to 45 million. Some 7 million live in Iraq, making up at least 15 to 20% of the total population. They are based in Iraqi Kurdistan region, as well as in Baghdad and other disputed areas. The Iraqi city of Kirkuk is shaping up to be a flashpoint. The multi-ethnic city sits on substantial oil reserves. Its crude is exported to the Mediterranean through a pipeline that crosses the Turkish-Iraqi territory and Turkey. The voting areas is much larger than just within the regions of the Kurdish communities. Erbil, Suleimania, Duhok, as well as disputed regions of Kirkuk, Makmur, Sinjar, and Kanashin are all included. It covers a population of an estimated 5 million people. The Kurdistan region of Iraq has been autonomous ever since Saddam Hussein's forces withdrew from parts of northern Iraq at the end of the 1991 Gulf War. Under some continuous U.S. support, the Kurds developed their own parliament, ministers, and armed forces. This referendum comes before Barzani steps down during the next election on November 1st.
And what do you make of the consequences arising from this referendum on the independence of Kurds in Iraq?
Well, it looks like it will pass, but the question is what kind of what will happen next after that? I mean, the Kurds it's an issue. They're split among 4 countries. None of these countries wants to see an independent Iraq. It's really split. People have to understand the roots of this were based after World War I, when England and France split apart the Ottoman Empire. Their desire was to never see it rise again. So they put in place a number of things, including splitting people. This was a very common tactic by both sides.
But I'm afraid a referendum is very different from a general election, and therefore any results coming out of this referendum would not be the same as a mandate of the electorate. And therefore, why should leaders and politicians from neighboring countries such as Iran and Syria, as well as Turkey in particular, should be so angry and concerned about the consequences?
Well, when you have a group of 30 plus million, somewhere between 35 and 40 million people, this is a big issue. You have a territory that is larger than Germany and Great Britain put together. It stretches across 4 different countries. You have, and what people don't understand, this is an ethnic divide. This is not based on religion. You have Sunnis, you have Shiites, you have Christians, you even have Jews who are part of this group, and they say themselves, we are separate and we want a separate homeland. But their kind of homeland would create a kind of partition, not necessarily of 4 countries, and this just cannot happen. But if this newest referendum ignites the political fires within these people, it could result in a long and bloody bloodbath.
Thank you so much. Let me cross over to Kirkuk and Mosul, political analyst, writer in Turkey, for his comments on the upcoming referendum. Hello, Kirkuk. Foreign ministers from Iran, Turkey and Iraq issued a joint statement on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly not long ago, condemning the referendum. Now, do you foresee that the results of the referendum would cause a partition of Iraq? And do you think the Turkish government would stand a big chance of conducting military interventions?
I share the same ideas with my colleague in the studio. This is a pole of fire. This will cause a new chaos in the region because not only the Kurds are in the Kurdish region. The Arab brothers and Turkmen brothers are already in Kirkuk, Mosul, Selahattin, and Hok. So the central government, Baghdad, opposite to this non-binding referendum, Turkey strongly condemning, and they have some special movements against to Kurdish authorities, and also neighbor countries like Iran and Turkey and Baghdad are discussing how will be the strong reaction to Barzani. This will be a strong question that fighting with Daesh, and now it is not finished already. There can be a civil war between Kurds, Arabs and Turkmens. That is an important development and a dangerous development for the region.
I'm not sure whether this will escalate into a civil war in Iraq or, in fact, a bloody conflict between several countries. And now let me turn to Israeli guest speaker, Mr. Meir Jivdanfar. Hello, Meir. Why do you think...
Hello there.
Hello. Why do you think the Israeli government supports the referendum?
Well, Israel, since the birth of the country in 1948, has been looking for other allies in this region. We have to remember that Israel is one of the very few countries in this region which is non-Arab. And because of its ongoing conflict with numerous Arab countries, since the foundation of the country, Israel has been adopting what is called the periphery doctrine, basically to look for friendship with countries on the periphery of the Middle East who are also non-Arab, or have disputes with Arab countries as kind of potential allies. And as a result of which Israel already had good relations with the Kurdish in Iraq in the 1970s, from the beginning of the 1970s to 1975. Some Israelis have even described it as a romance where both countries cooperated with the help of the Shah of Iran against Saddam Hussein, who was an enemy of Israel. But as soon as Iran and Saddam reached the deal in 1975, that relationship ended. Israel has been looking forward to re-establish relations with the Kurdish, in Iraq, and now is the golden opportunity for Israel to have another non-Arab ally in the Middle East, namely Kurdistan in northern Iraq.
Does it make any sense, Meir, that Kurds are actually the largest ethnic group without a state, and therefore this reminds us of the miserable history that Jews suffered for at least 2,000 years? Look at the issue of Zionism. Do you think there are any similarities between Zionism and the desire by Kurds to establish their own independent homeland in northern Iraq?
That's another angle to it. That's a historical angle. Both peoples have been homeless. They have been viewed as their host countries as kind of guests, or sometimes unwanted guests. Both have faced genocide, and yes, there is similarities. But to be frank with you, in this region in the Middle East, this is a very difficult region in the world in which to be a minority. Minorities are not treated very well here, and one of the ongoing problems that we have in this region are two people who, since World War II, have been left homeless. First of all is the Kurdish people, and the other is the Palestinian. And until and unless these two people have a home and have their own independence, I think they are going to be struggling for it, and we in the Middle East are going to be bearing the brunt of the instability that brings. We as Israelis, we already have our homeland, and we know what it feels like to be without a homeland, and what it compels you to do. So until such times that the Kurds and the Palestinians in this region also have their own homeland, I think one of the pieces of the puzzle for stability in this region will be missing.
Thank you. Let me go to Istanbul. Sukay, do you think there will be a war? A correspondent from China Central Television has just done an interview with a former general of the Revolutionary Guard of Iran. And this general said bluntly in front of the camera, look, the referendum is likely to cause very bloody conflicts in the Middle East region. What do you think of this warning?
Thank you for this question. My colleague in Israel seems the situation's developments a more romantic way. It's not a romantic issue, it's a political issue. Mr. Barzani is demanding some parts of Turkey and Iran and Syria. So it seems that a corridor starting from northern Iraq to Mediterranean Sea, this will be a satellite state of Israel. So Israel is supporting on this way. But why are the neighbors having border, why are they opposing in the opposition? Iran, Iraq, Central Iraq and Turkey have a huge conflict in their mind that this will be a chaotic region because in the 21st century, let's look for the investments, commercial issues, not fighting ways, some solutions like China did take an initiative, and it's a new Silk Road. So it is not the time for Kurds, especially Barzani administration, to create a problem. The problem should be to make them reach economical way. So if Barzani's administration don't stop this political way, I'm afraid Turkey is ready to send troops to show the different face of Turkish army, and I think Baghdad administration, Central Baghdad administration and Iran are also ready to do this.
Thank you very much. Anna, why did the United States fail to intervene with the bloody crackdown by Saddam Hussein upon the independence appeal by Kurds in the wake of Operation Desert Storm back in 1991?
Well, quite frankly, from the United States' point of view, he was our actor in the game. He was acting against Iran. That was our chief thing, so we turned a blind eye to many things that he had done. When it was discovered that he was using all sorts of inhuman tactics, not only against them, but against the Marsh Arabs and things like that.
But Kurds had a strong feeling that they had been abandoned and betrayed.
The Kurds have been abandoned and betrayed routinely over history. There's no question that they've undergone tremendous hardships. Their language, culture, everything has been suppressed in all of these countries.
And my question is, why did the European Union support the independence of Kosovo, and the United States was also supportive of the independence of Kosovo from Serbia? But in the case of Kurdistan, neither European Union nor the United States has expressed their positive support for the independence itself. Why the double standards?
Well, I mean, it's all about oil. The destabilized Middle East is going to put into question the ability to get oil in and out. There are also other questions about how this would play out. I mean, you have 30 million people covering a huge swath of land. You're going to be bringing in 4 countries. This would be a civil war of epic proportions. The issue here is that, you know, is separatism the answer? You know, is this creating a new state going to solve anything?
What about the other angle, Anna?
What?
The United States came under huge pressure over the allegation that CIA had been involved in the assassination attempt and the coup attempt at President Erdogan last year, and therefore relationship between Ankara and Washington has been pretty strained. This time around, with the position of Ankara deeply and clearly in the mind of President Donald Trump, the United States cannot afford to offend once again its ally in the NATO. Turkey is a member of the NATO, right? So what do you think of the American calculations, its calculus?
Well, it's hard to understand what exactly the calculus is in the United States with Donald Trump at the helm. I mean, all traditional notions of politics and the way that the U.S. has acted in the past are out the door. But we have seen quite clearly Turkey has moved closer both to China and to Russia in particular. They're guarding it. It's obviously, there are bad feelings between Turkey and Germany. Merkel, as the de facto head, and probably continuing to be a major factor in the EU, has basically called them out, and I don't know that they'll remain in NATO. I mean, it's a very explosive situation. The question really is, what does Erdogan want? Remember, he has almost 20%, 18% a calculation of Kurds in his country. He has not been able to defeat this insurgent PKK group, which is behind these things. So it's not as simple as just saying, I'm going to send my army into another country where there are even more Kurds and unite them against us. So this has to be handled very delicately, hopefully through diplomatic means. You know, the fact that terrible things have happened to these people does not mean that you should jump off the cliff of separatism and see even more people die needlessly.
Let me go to Israel. Hello, Mr. Mir Jivdanfar. Do you believe Israel and the Kurds are actually the only beneficiary of the Arab Revolution, which has plunged the whole region into blood of this process of political upheavals there? Now, Syria has fallen apart, and do you think Iraq is likely to demise in the wake of defeating ISIL? Because the Kurds are said to be the beneficiary because they have been able to enlarge their turf with the defeat of ISIL. And Israel has been left marginalized happily and sweetly because of the rise of sectarian violence, which has replaced the Arab-Israeli conflicts, which is the hallmark of the Middle East peace process before. What do you think of this allegation?
Look, the truth of the matter is that ISIL is an enemy of the State of Israel. In fact, we are assisting Egypt to fight ISIL in the Sinai. They have targeted the Israeli city of Eilat, and we've caught a number of ISIL terrorists from Israel who wanted to join the group or who were already its members. Instability in the Middle East has not benefited Israel. Syria is now even more unstable. In fact, instability in Syria has been to our detriment because now Iran has something like 20,000 Shia militia in Syria because of its support for Assad, which was, which started on the pretext of fighting ISIL. Before ISIL, the number of Iranian forces in Syria could be maybe into the low hundreds. Now there are 20,000. So this is a real danger, and this has happened because of the post-ISIL region. One thing I would say, and this is in response to my respected colleague in Turkey, the Kurdish people are not having independence because of Israel. The Kurdish people are embarking on the path of independence for themselves. ISIL brought them, there was a lot of fear after ISIL started catching Mosul, that they're going to go for Erbil next. There was 1 million Arab refugees who took refuge in the Kurdish regional government in northern Iraq, which the Kurdish government had to feed and had to look after without any help from Baghdad. Then there's also the ongoing dispute with Baghdad over oil revenue, over Kirkuk, a very sensitive subject, which could turn into an armed conflict in the future. So I don't think that, the Kurds are not doing this for Israel. They're not doing this for anybody else but for themselves. I understand why countries such as Turkey and Iran are concerned, and Syria, because they have their own Kurdish minority. But the Kurdish question, alongside the Palestinian question, has to be answered. 20 million people cannot be ignored. And at the same time, I think the question of ISIL was a danger before, and now that it has disappeared, there is the danger of lone wolf attacks, and even more, a bigger danger is what happens in the vacuum. And it's this vacuum which should worry all the countries of the region when it comes to the security and stability of this region, because it could cause many armed conflicts.
Sir Kai, given this irreversible process of a geopolitical reconfiguration in the volatile region of the Middle East, with Israel taking side with the Kurds on the issue of a referendum and the independence of Kurdistan, do you believe major players in this region, such as Turkey and Israel, will go to war over the issue of Kurdistan?
Of course not. Turkey and Israel passed over these conflict issues, and now Ankara and Jerusalem have good connections. That is not the issue. The problem is, I think Israel supports the Kurdish leaders because Israel sees that Iran is getting more influence in the region, and now Iran is going to push and be in a chaos, maybe dealing with the Kurds. Maybe that is the main question. But from the Turkish side, now Turkey is ready for economical, political, and military choices. And also important point is that it is important and related with the unity of Iraq. And Turkey wouldn't hesitate to use its rights coming from international agreements and bilateral agreements. That is important. First, the diplomatic ways, and some embargoes will come, and the fighting, the army solution will follow after all.
It's not just about the independence of Kurdistan. Actually, as our Israeli friend mentioned earlier in the discussion, it's about the future of Kirkuk, which is a city on very rich oil deposits. Do you believe this is a very dangerous and explosive issue, and this is actually the catalyst for regional confrontation? Let me first of all go to our Israeli friend Mir, and then I expect our Turkish friend to respond to his comments. Please, Mir.
The issue of Kirkuk, you're right. This is something that should worry us, everybody. Israel, Turkey, Iran. The city of Kirkuk, as you said, it has a lot of oil revenue, but also it has a lot of symbolic and sentimental value to its Kurdish population and to its Arab and Turkmen population. On the one hand, the Kurds are saying, look, Kirkuk, we recaptured Kirkuk. We are the ones who've been, we're the ones who've been securing Kirkuk. We are the ones who've been defending Kirkuk. It should stay in our hands. But on the other side of the equation, the Arabs see Kirkuk as an Arab city. The majority of it they view is Arab citizens. They view it as part of Iraq. And this is something that not just the Sunni Iraqis, but also Shia Iraqis disagree with. There have been unconfirmed reports that there have been threats made against the Peshmerga forces by the Shia militia in Iraq as to what could happen over the future of Kirkuk. This is where diplomacy needs to come in. This is where the Kurdish region, Kurdistan in northern Iraq, Iran and Syria really need to talk, because this is one area that unless we have talks and unless we have negotiations, basically with a very, very speedy event, could turn into a crisis, could turn into another sectarian war. We've had before sectarian Sunni Shia. Now we could have a new sectarian conflict between Kurd, Turkmen and Arab over the city of Kirkuk. We really need the international community to try to facilitate some kind of diplomatic negotiations over this very sensitive topic.
Sir Kai, do you foresee an emergency session by the UN Security Council to discuss the referendum and the regional impact, because without the intervention from the international society, namely the UN Security Council, there's likely to be a bloody conflict. There's likely to be a regional war between the axis, which is critical and condemning this referendum, and the Kurds. Perhaps behind the Kurds are the Israelis.
You're right. It's an emergency issue. Kirkuk nearly gets 40% of the all Iraq's oil total amount. But Kirkuk and the state of Mosul was Ottoman Empire's old states. Just 80 years ago, Mosul was a state of Ottoman Empire, and Kirkuk and Mosul are Turkmen cities. Turkey pays attention to these two cities, as you mentioned it. The point is that if any change at the borders without dealing with Turkey, Central Iraq government and England, the international agreements say that Turkey has rights on Kirkuk and Mosul. So United Nations and of course the international powers should deal on this.
Thank you so much, friend in Israel and Turkey. Thank you so much for your participation and very insightful comments on this sensational issue of the referendum. Welcome back very quickly. And do you foresee any intervention by the United States to protect Kurds? After all, it's the United States that helped establish the no-fly zone in the wake of liberating Kuwait back in the early 1990s. Now, when the Kurds, should they come under huge pressure from the neighboring countries which are vehemently against their independence and may turn to the military intervention, what do you think would be the most likely response from Washington?
I doubt that Trump would be investing in it. This would be a new war. This is something that would be against all of the politics that he ran on in his campaign trail. Very doubtful. I'm a little worried by our friend in Turkey. It sounded like he was making nationalistic claims over cities in other countries. If this is the case, you're looking at a very, very serious situation. The U.S. will stay out. I think the EU stays out. There'll be a lot of talking at the UN. But this is unfortunately being pushed. The danger here about, and why we're talking about Kirkuk, is battles are won by soldiers, but wars are won by economies. And without this kind of revenue, there would not be the ability to wage the kind of war that is probably going to happen.
The Israeli guest speaker Mir mentioned that Kurdistan in northern Iraq was able to accommodate 1 million refugees due to the Arab Revolution without any assistance from Baghdad. Now, do you think any conflict between Kurds and the neighboring hostiles would generate yet another wave of humanitarian crisis? And in this case, what would be the common stakes for the international society?
Well, the international society has turned a deaf ear to the plight of refugees going all around the world, and no matter where we're talking about, if it's Africa and in Southeast Asia and things. So I don't think there's going to be much action. There just isn't enough money, and there is not the political will. There's no leadership in this area. So unfortunately, I do not have a very optimistic opinion of this. It would require everyone to get together and, as you said, put this at the UN store.
Thank you so much. And that's the end of this edition of Dialogue on the future of Kurdistan or the referendum by Kurds in northern Iraq. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.